The mega battle for the oceans involves epic clashes, daring harbor raids, and covert underwater adventures that have churned the seas through the ages. Researchers are now discovering the naval technologies and tactics that underpin 3,000 years of man and machine waging wars to dominate the oceans. How did this ancient battleship ram its way to victory in the most important naval engagement of the ancient world? Why did this ghost ship disappear only to resurface again in the 21st century? And how did a whole new tactic of naval warfare defeat an enemy fleet 7 miles wide without losing a single ship? The mega battle for the oceans is our ancient discovery. Man has always felt the allure of the sea, becoming enthralled, yet so often consumed by it. The Mary Celeste, the Black Pearl, the Bermuda Triangle. Vessels that sailed into fog banks to reappear 100 years later, or craft crewed by ghosts of the dead.
We're talking about a place full of mystery, a place which is completely unknown, that sense of dabbling in the dark.
But the sea gives us real mysteries more intriguing than fiction. Off the coast of Britain, we have discovered a ghost ship, the remains of a vessel that matches no records.
It is simply the skeleton of a ship. It is a dead ship. All we have are pieces of timber. We have the ribs of the hull. We have no idea what happened beyond that.
Does our ship belong in old sea dogs' tales of ghostly apparitions and mysterious vanishings? What real story lies waiting to be told?
It's an entity in its own life. A ship tends to be a living being almost. It can tell a story, it's been to places, and it's part of the history of our times.
Now, investigators are using hard science to discover the secrets of this ancient vessel.
It's just like forensic science. We have a body. Now we need to know who that person was. Now we need to know what this ship is all about.
The discovery of the ship was made in 2002 in Newport in Britain. There are 2,000 pieces of oak belonging to a ship at least 10 times bigger than any other vessel recorded in the annals of the port.
It's a huge ship. It's an ocean-going vessel, not the sort of thing you'd expect in a small port like Newport.
In the ancient world, ships were the most costly investment man could build and develop, and the pinnacle of pre-industrial technology. This meant records were kept of their construction and trading missions. Yet no record of this ghost ship exists. No one knows where it was built, who crewed it, or even her name.
Because we haven't got the bow and stern of this ship, it's very difficult for us to understand the full size of the ship and actually the shape of it, because they're the two parts of the ship that would usually help you sort of identify those two things.
Today, the discoveries are preserved in tanks of fresh water to keep the wood from drying out and eventually disintegrating. Archaeologists and scientists meticulously study each and every fragment, searching for clues to the elusive mystery of this forgotten ship.
This is the real joy of archaeology. We use lots of clues and we piece them together to form a bigger picture. And we can do this in a number of ways. We have a fantastic piece of archaeology here, but what do we have in the historic record?
To be able to match the ship to its records, the first thing that is needed is a date. Just like our fingerprints and DNA, each timber has unique features that can give us clues to where and when the tree was felled.
What we have here is a piece of our mystery ship. Now we have to try and find some more information.
Using a scientific dating process called dendrochronology, Mai and archaeologist Ben Jennings are attempting to discover a date for the ship.
Dendrochronology is looking at the structure of a tree, and in particularly the amount of growth that a tree puts on each year. So we're looking at the tree ring sequence, so the annual rings of a tree, and how much it grows in each individual year.
By taking a cross-section from a piece of strut timber that was used to support the ship while it was in harbor, Ben can analyze its growth pattern, as one ring usually marks the passage of 1 year in the life of the tree. The ring data sequence is then compared and matched to a database of other European tree chronologies. So far, none of the timber used to originally build the ship have been matched to the database.
So we've measured our rings now, and we've got the results on screen here. We seem to have a fairly secure date for the ship, and it looks as if the timber was felled in 1467.
This is step one in identifying the mystery of the ghost ship. The 15th century was an explosive era of maritime trade.
We have wide trade going on. We have trade in the north, up to the Baltic, Russia. We have trade in the south to the Mediterranean and North Africa. We have trade throughout the southern European states.
The dating of the timbers suggests that the ship was part of the emerging world economy that was beginning to open up in the 15th century. A time when new territories were discovered and cultures were brought together by maritime expeditions. Europe, Africa, India, China, and the Americas, all linked by ocean-going vessels. We have the when, now we need the where. If we can find out which country the ship was constructed in, we can match it to the country's historical records during the 15th century.
This is part of an incredibly vibrant economy that's going on. And unfortunately, although we know that such an economy existed, the day-to-day business of it is still a little bit murky. We don't have the details. This ship is helping to supply that kind of detail.
Different ships were built in different ways, depending on which region they were from. If we can discover how the ghost ship was constructed, we can match it to a region. Stuart is using a 3D laser scanner called a faro arm.
The faro arm enables us to draw the timbers individually, all four faces, looking for data. This data is invaluable because it can be transferred to other academics so they can understand more about the mysterious past.
After scanning and studying the pieces of this medieval jigsaw, archaeologists can put them together to determine the design and construction methods of the ship.
This individual piece is a large framing floor timber of a clinker-built ship, possibly toward the rear or to the front of the ship, simply because of the Y of the tree. Also, it's slightly flared on this edge here, illustrating that the timbers are closing in to a tapered end, and also the clinker joggles here, step marks with rebates and axe marks.
The discovery that the ship is clinker-built goes against what we know about ocean-going shipbuilding in the 15th century. Clinker-built means a hull whose planks overlap and is generally associated with Northern European and Chinese boat building up until the 14th century. Ocean-going vessels of the 15th century, especially large trade ships, are usually built in the carvel method, by which the planks are edge to edge.
We have styles of building that don't quite fit. We have a clinker-built ship, and yet we have the spaces that form the ribs of the ship are very narrow, which would imply that we have almost a hybrid. We have elements of Northern European shipbuilding and elements of Southern European shipbuilding. And without written record, it's almost impossible for us to pin this ship down.
The discovery that the ship is a hybrid means we cannot narrow our search, and that maybe this really is a ghost ship, one that does not match any other ship so far discovered.
When you get a thing like this, it's mainly a detective game. You have to go on the evidence you've got, and in fact the evidence keeps increasing all the time. And it's interesting, since it was discovered, our ideas about it have changed and changed and changed again as more information comes up.
While studying the timbers, archaeologists stumbled across a vital clue that indicates the ship may be French.
We have a very small French coin which dates from 1445 to 1456 and is from the south of France. Now, the reason why this is important for the Newport ship is because the piece of timber that we found the coin in is one of the first pieces of ship that you build, and once that is in position, it doesn't move and it's very difficult to get to it.
These clues reveal the time and place our ship was built. They give us a glimpse of the reality behind our shadowy enigma. We now know that the ship was built around 1445, possibly in France, and came to its resting place in the UK around 1467. The records that will reveal its full secrets still wait to be discovered.
Now we have tangible evidence, and it's up to us to build on that tangible evidence to paint a real, full and complete picture of the mystery ship. What is fascinating is that by using all the evidence available, by using the bare timbers themselves, the skeleton from the body, by putting that together with the archive, with the written materials that we have, by putting together the science of dendrochronology and the use of techniques like the Pharaoh arm to construct the physical appearance of the ship, then we can build quite a clear impression.
Using the discoveries from the mystery ship and combining it with what we know about ships in the 15th century, Ancient Discoveries has created a computer model. For the first time in 500 years, we can see what our ship looked like. It was a unique hybrid of clinker and carvel, a 3-masted ocean-going vessel capable of carrying up to 100 tons of cargo. Our ghost ship has finally materialized. Though we cannot confirm what caused the vessel to sink, we have established a solid theory as to where and when it began its brief life at sea. The battle to control the oceans has always pushed man beyond his limits. He has also battled to explore its mysterious depths. Will a brand new discovery reveal that man walked on the ocean bed 250 years before the history books tell us it was possible? Man's quest to control the world's vast oceans has extended above and below its depths. Ancient Discoveries is examining intriguing revelations about underwater exploration of the ancients.
Men want to know what's out there. They want to know where the sea goes, what's beyond the sea. Is it, in fact, just the edge of the world, and were they all going to die?
The oceans to ancient man were a mysterious and threatening power, a dangerous and unknown world where monsters lurked. But is it possible that they braved the depths much earlier than we previously thought? A fascinating medieval manuscript by an anonymous engineer describes military technology used in the Hussite Wars, a religious conflict between Catholics and Protestants in Central Europe at the beginning of the 15th century.
The underwater suit illustrated in the Hussite Wars manuscript looks convincingly like a modern suit. It does suggest some attempt to pump air into the top of the suit and therefore to give the diver more endurance underwater. How far that's successful is another question.
Can a 15th century design supply air to a diver? Could the ancients have built this suit? Or was it simply a pipe dream?
They show us the level of knowledge and understanding of technology as a sort of time capsule or a snapshot in time of that period.
A team of diving experts and historians in Denmark have replicated the manuscript's design using only the materials available to 15th century engineers.
We based the helmet on the great bassinet that a knight would use in that period when he was jousting. And instead of a visor, it had a couple of holes with handmade glass set in a lead frame here in the front.
What makes the design a landmark in underwater technology is that it combines diving with a continual air supply. The manuscript clearly shows a pipe feeding into the diver's helmet. This is known as an open helmet, as it allows air in and out. In the 15th century, it would most likely have been made of iron. Until this time, divers had relied on their physical endurance to explore the depths. With a single breath, they could descend to about 300 feet. Whether they were harvesting food and sponges, or salvaging sunken wrecks, or carrying out military raids, the limit of their capability was a lungful of air.
So if you can't pump air down to the men underwater, they have a limited endurance. This severely restricts what they can actually achieve. You can go down, possibly find something, and come back up again. That's what divers are doing all around the world. Free divers in the Far East, pearl divers, and recovery divers.
The manuscript does not show how air was pumped into the pipe. Jens relies on his knowledge of medieval technology to come up with the most likely solution. He has designed a system that was in common use by blacksmiths to pump air into furnaces in the 15th century. 3 sets of bellows, each of around 5-liter capacity, are connected by iron pipes to a wooden chest. The chest acts as a pressure chamber that forces air down to the helmet. The whole system is sealed using beeswax because of its waterproofing and adhesive properties.
Now I tied the hose to the helmet, and then I'm gonna tie some lead weights to the bottom of the helm, and then we can try lower it into the tank and pump on the bellow and see if we will get air coming out of the helmet. And then we can try it on different depths and see if we have air pressure enough on the bellow to get the diver all the way to the bottom.
Each pipe inlet has a valve that ensures the oxygen is only fed one way. The used air is pushed out of the bottom of the helmet.
Now that seemed to, like it was working very good. We had a lot of bubbles coming up through the bottom of the helmet, and even when we lowered fairly deep, there was still a lot of airflow. There's still some air escaping through the joints on the hose, but I don't think it's too bad. So I think we can put a diver in here and go ahead.
The ability to supply oxygen to a diver was the next natural step after free diving. But originally, this was not done with a pipe. It was done with a diving bell, a container which traps air when it is turned upside down and placed over the diver's head. It was first described by the Greek writer Aristotle in the 4th century BC, but did not come into regular use until the 17th century.
When we're thinking about ancient and medieval diving technology, we have to remember the limits. The limits are human endurance underwater and the failure to develop any kind of rebreathing system.
The air in a diving bell is soon used up, so the next step was to replenish the air available to the diver. This is what our experts believe the Hussite manuscript shows. The diver is provided with medieval wooden clogs with the addition of lead soles to weigh him down in the water. John will be accompanying Kurt into the test tank to ensure he can give assistance if the pumps do not supply the oxygen needed for him to survive underwater. Kurt's task will be to descend 20 feet to the bottom and walk along the seabed. He should be able to stay submerged for as long as his colleagues can supply him with air.
That was very good, and when I was at the bottom, the water went up here sometimes, and so I couldn't get air, and so I went a little bit up and down there in order to get air all the time. But otherwise, it was very, very good.
Kurt has found that as long as there is a continuous supply of air pumped through to him from above ground, he can comfortably stay underwater as long as he needs to. The suit's design has achieved its purpose.
Well, it was something else. Very interesting. Not only was he able to walk around totally comfortably, he was able to kneel down and actually touch the ground. So he could actually work with his hands on the seabed. That was very impressive. And there was plenty of air coming out. I went right up to the helmet, looked right inside. I could see he was perfectly happy.
The test encourages us to look again at the history books and consider elements of technology that may have been dismissed or overlooked by historians. Though no accounts remain of the suits being used, we have discovered that the ancients had the technological know-how to send man into the depths of the ocean 250 years before written records tell us it was possible.
We don't know if it ever was made or it was just in some guy's mind, but with the material and the knowledge they had in the Middle Ages, it was possible to go down there to conquer the sea.
In our next ancient discovery, we investigate the most important naval battle of the ancient world. Using 3D battle strategy analysis, Ancient Discoveries will reveal how this ancient battleship rammed its way to victory against the biggest invasion force the world had ever seen. Over the first 5,000 years of man's attempt to dominate the oceans, one single battle stands out in world history. More than 2 millennia after this epic clash, Ancient Discoveries is investigating the technologies and strategy behind one of the most tactically brilliant naval victories ever fought. We will discover how an overwhelmingly outnumbered force triumphed against an invading superpower, changing the course of Western history.
This visualization really helps to bring this battle alive.
In the 5th century BC, the greatest power in the ancient world was the Persian Empire.
The Persian Empire was huge. It spanned from the borders of modern-day Turkey to the shores of India. And the Persian king, Xerxes, was the all-powerful despot of the ancient world.
The only resistance came from an alliance of the fiercely independent city-states of Greece. For 10 years, they had fought off invasion and fermented revolutions on Persian soil. Xerxes was out to crush them.
Xerxes began his march with the biggest fighting force that the ancient world had ever seen.
The Greeks were vastly outnumbered on land and at sea. The Persians sacked and burned any Greek cities which did not immediately surrender.
As they approached Athens, they stood in front of the Acropolis, the sacred heart of Athens, the White House, the Capitol Hill of its day.
The Persians showed no mercy. During the course of a 3-week siege, they killed everyone before finally burning the temple to the ground.
When the Persians torched the Acropolis, they desecrated the most important site in Athens. They really demonstrated that this was a war to the finish.
The Greeks had one last great hope, its navy, 300 warships known as triremes, led by Athenian general Themistocles.
The navy and Themistocles, its leader, took the decision to retreat, but to where? Themistocles knew the answer. It was the Straits of Salamis.
The straits are a narrow channel between the island of Salamis and the mainland. If the Persian ships could be lured down it, they could not deploy in battle order. Their advantage would be neutralized.
The Greeks, with a much smaller force, could hope to take on the largest army the world had ever known.
2,500 years after the Greeks and Persians faced each other on the waters of the Straits of Salamis, Michael has come to relive their epic battle.
We're here near the Straits of Salamis, where the Greek navy waited in anticipation for the arrival of the much larger Persian force. Here, the Persians gathered, and May had to make a decision. Did they wait for the Greeks to emerge from the straits and attack in the open waters? Or did they go into the straits themselves and take on the Greek navy?
A spy informed Xerxes that the Greeks were in disarray, so he ordered his fleet into the straits. But the spy was a double agent. Xerxes was sailing into a trap.
As the Persian triremes approached the Straits of Salamis, their oars beating in unison, the Greek fleet finally came into view. They were confronted with 300 Greek triremes lined up against this bay in the straits. And finally they realized the trap that had been sprung. The Greek fleet was not about to disintegrate and go home. The Greek fleet was preparing for battle.
What happened next in these straits would change the ancient world forever. Using ancient maps and modern satellite images, 3D specialists James Dean and Michael have rebuilt the Bay of Salamis in 3D. Using a combination of eyewitness reports and ancient historical sources, they will discover the blow-by-blow account of the battle.
Here we can see the landscape of Salamis. In our setup here, we're representing the Greek forces in blue and the Persians in red. And these ship icons, these represent groups of triremes.
The Greek naval commanders were able to amass a fleet of 300 triremes. According to ancient writer Aeschylus, Xerxes, the Persian king, commanded a naval force of 200,000 Marines on board 1,000 triremes.
The Greeks have retreated sort of 10 days or so before the battle into this small inlet here, and they've beached their ships, which for a trireme made of wood is critical because it's soaking up water all the time, and it gets heavier, it's not as fast.
The dry triremes of the Greeks provided them with the slightest of advantages going into the battle. The Persian ships were slightly heavier and thus slower. They had also been at sea for 17 days, and their commanders and crews were weary. The ancient sources tell us that the Greeks formed up in 2 lines of triremes against the 3 lines of the Persian fleet.
We're now approaching the time of first contact, so talk us through that.
Well, Herodotus, one of the ancient sources, is unable to tell us for sure who made first contact, but it was definitely one of the Greeks. One ship moves forward to start the battle, and then the Battle of Salamis begins for real.
The Greek trireme was the consummate attack weapon, a 120-foot-long warship that used 170 oarsmen to propel its bronze battering ram into enemy ships. Narrow and low with a 10-to-1 length-to-width ratio. A human-powered torpedo.
The whole purpose of the Greek ram is to strike an underwater blow that will leave the ship full of water but still afloat. So it can't move, it can't function, it can be picked up later.
Using simulation software, James and Michael are able to discover how the trireme generated the power to ram enemy ships.
We've got a model of the Greek trireme here.
The first problem is, how do we get the number of people on board this thing? I mean, there would have been 200 people, the 170 or so oarsmen that would have powered this vessel, this attack vessel, forward. And this model shows us the 3 tiers of rowers that there would have been. Right?
Let's take a look at their seating arrangement. So if we work down from the top here, so if I drop down, we can see there's the first row. Second row really crammed in underneath them, isn't it? Very tight.
Yeah.
And then again, down here, we've got the final row there.
Final row that are completely cut off. Yeah. And this bottom row would have been almost at the waterline in that sense.
So if we jump outside and take a look, so there we can see the front of the ship, and you know, the waterline is here.
The Greek trireme, because it wasn't built for the open seas, it was built as an attack vessel. They made it much lower in the water, less stout, less stern, less ready to take on the open seas, but much better in an attack situation because it could move faster and it was effectively lighter. It also didn't have to carry all the troops that the Persian ships had to carry because they were coming all the way across the Aegean Sea.
The rowers, tightly packed in 3 banks, were the powerhouses of the trireme, with its direction controlled by 2 rudders at the back of the ship.
It's a sports car of its day. There's no concessions made for storage or anything. It's just about power to weight.
In the ancient world, naval combat relied on 2 methods of ramming.
One is called, and what we're looking at now is the diekplus, the rowing through. And this is where they would utilize a gap between enemy triremes to come round through in the circle and then attack from behind. In the narrow straits of Salamis, it's hard to know whether they would have been able to have this gap. So there's an alternative version called the periplus, where instead of going through, they try to go around the enemy line entirely and then come round to attack.
By midday, 4 hours into the battle, the Greeks' plan was beginning to pay off. Their ramming attacks on the Persian fleet had sent their enemy into disarray.
All the ancient sources agree on this point, that the Persians completely lost battle formation. They lost control, they didn't keep together, whereas the Greeks maintained their positions and they maintained a formation. And then we can see that here.
You can actually see that the superior numbers of Persians is working as a huge disadvantage to them. They've really cornered themselves, and there isn't enough space for them to maneuver in the strait.
The key to the Greek victory in these straits was their ability to maintain a close-ordered formation, drawing the Persians into the killing zone, where the Greek triremes were most effective.
So this is a little bit later in the day, and we can really see the Persians have been totally broken here. So talk us through this.
The sources tell us that as the Persians turned to flee, the losses are something like 200 triremes have been destroyed in the straits, whereas the Greeks may only have lost as little as 40 triremes. It was a complete and utter Greek victory.
According to the ancient source documents of Herodotus and Aeschylus, it was a rout.
It's hard to imagine, with all these modern ships around us, quite what it must have been like on that fateful day, the 20th of September, 480 BC. Nearly 1,000 triremes crammed into these straits, facing up against one another. By the end, you could almost not see the water for the floating debris of the triremes and of the dead corpses which littered these straits.
Thousands of Persian sailors and their ships lay at the bottom of Salamis as Xerxes watched in horror. The door to Europe was firmly shut after the defeat. It would be over 1,500 years before an Eastern ruler would invade Europe again. In 1588, the nation of England stood on the brink of total annihilation as the most powerful army in Europe entered the English Channel in a huge armada of 130 ships. The fleet belonged to King Philip II of Spain, and in battle formation was over 7 miles wide.
The Armada that came from Spain was the most impressive fleet probably ever to sail from any country in the world up to that point.
How the English Navy defeated this armada without the loss of a single ship is one of the greatest questions in the history of the battle for the oceans. Now, through groundbreaking new research and battle strategy analysis, we will show you new discoveries that explain how and why this was possible.
Spain was the superpower of the 16th century. In Spain, the time is known as El Siglo d'Oro, the golden century.
Conquering the oceans gave Catholic Spain unique wealth, power, and global reach. Her royal fleet ruled the waves from the shores of Italy to the beaches of the New World.
When Columbus discovered the New World at the end of the 15th century, he gave his Spanish masters the wealth to wage war on an unprecedented scale. Gold, silver, jewels, and all kinds of other new treasures made the Spanish crown the richest of all the European powers.
The greatest threat to Spanish wealth lurked on the 4,000-mile treasure route back across the Atlantic. Pirates, sponsored by the English Queen Elizabeth, prowled the high seas, waiting to intercept the lucrative cargo.
And the English pirate Drake had sailed all the way around the world, attacking the Spanish and their commercial opportunities at every stage. Just to wrap things up, the Queen of England, Elizabeth, was a heretic. She was also almost certainly illegitimate in the eyes of the Spanish crown. And if she was got rid of, the man with the next best claim to the throne was Philip II, King of Spain.
By the mid-16th century, Philip decided it was time to finish off the Protestant Elizabeth and invade England to restore a Catholic government and regain control of the oceans. In 1588, the fleet was ready. 130 ships commanded by its general Medina Sidonia set sail from Lisbon, confident of victory.
In the early summer of 1588, the Spanish Armada set sail from Lisbon, Portugal. Their target was England, some 726 nautical miles away. They were first spotted from St Michael's Mount in Cornwall, on the southwest coast of England. Fire beacons had been set up all along the coast leading to London to announce the arrival of the Spanish Armada in English waters. Within hours, the country was on high alert and land and sea forces had been mobilized for war.
In an age before high-speed communications, the fire beacon was the quickest way to relay a prearranged message. And in England, that was the alert the Spanish were coming. The continuous chain of beacons across the breadth of the country passed this message from one to the next. Within minutes, the English Navy were aware that the enemy was in its waters.
The bulk of the English Navy is here in Plymouth Harbour, trapped by the tide. Had the Spanish attacked them now, they would have gained an early advantage and in all likelihood destroyed them.
But this was not part of the Spanish plan.
Philip's strategy was to sail from Spain, to land briefly in the Spanish Netherlands, to pick up the Duke of Parma, who was his brilliant commander there, and 30,000 troops, and ferry them across to England, where they would land and fight a purely land engagement.
The Spanish sailed on through the English Channel in a huge defensive crescent formation, in confident disregard of the English. At its heart was the war galleon, a 1,000-ton, 180-foot-long supership that was the first type of warship built to carry and fire heavy artillery guns at sea.
This is the ship Batavia, a replica of a 17th century galleon. It's the closest we can get to an Armada period galleon, and the Spanish fleet would have had several of these ships. Large, powerful, three-masted sailing ships carrying a heavy battery of cannon, a lot of troops, a lot of fighting power concentrated in a very tight package.
The war galleys of the Spanish were the battle cruisers of the 16th century. Powered by 3 sails, they were designed and built to be like floating fortresses. Naval warfare of the period was essentially an infantry contest waged at sea.
It had enormously high fighting platforms at the front and the back of the ship. These were where the soldiers gathered, and the object of the galleon was to get alongside an enemy galleon and swing across with ropes and grappling irons, board, and conduct a land battle at sea.
When they made contact with the English, the Spanish tactic would be to get close and use their anti-personnel weaponry, like the musket and the hail shot. This was a small cannon hooked over the side of the ship that fired heavy anti-personnel rounds to kill the enemy massed on their own deck.
The Armada sailed relentlessly on towards its rendezvous with the invasion force in Flanders, leaving the English Navy trailing behind.
But there was a problem for the Spanish. Communications between the ships and the army had proven difficult. It became clear only now that the army had yet to be equipped or assembled in port, a process which would take at least 6 days.
With little choice, the Spanish Armada dropped anchor in crescent formation off the coast of Calais, France, some 25 miles away from Flanders.
The English fleet took advantage of Spain's critical planning error. According to contemporary accounts, the first English attack was made up of fire ships. A fire ship is literally a ship that is on fire and also loaded with gunpowder and explosives. The ship is set alight and without a crew is directed towards an enemy fleet.
8 fire ships packed with tar, gunpowder and other flammable material set sail from the English position straight into the center of the Spanish crescent, breaking it in 2.
A night attack with blazing incendiaries forces the Spanish to cut their anchor cables and make sail, and in the chaos they lose the cohesion that's defended them all the way up the channel and kept their order working.
The formation which had so effectively protected the Armada until now was scattered and its ships were vulnerable. The world order hung in the balance. How could the English Navy defeat the invincible Spanish Armada and save a nation? This cannon is a replica of England's last hope against a maritime invasion force of 30,000 men. Ancient Discoveries is about to fire it to discover if it lives up to its reputation as the ship killer. In 1588, the largest concentration of naval artillery the world had ever witnessed was in the English Channel. An armada of 130 ships sent by Philip II of Spain to overthrow England's Queen Elizabeth. All that stood in their way was the English Navy.
The early engagements in the Channel were the first time that 2 major fleets had fought a gunnery action under sail.
In the 16th century, sailing ships armed with heavy cannon had very rarely been used at sea. So both the Spanish and English fleet commanders had to explore a new way of fighting, to work with the artillery they had on board.
Both ships carried large numbers of quite heavy cannon, but the English fleet had been built around cannon as a way of fighting a battle. These were fast, agile ships with relatively low superstructures designed to fight as gun platforms.
Learning from earlier battles in the Channel, the English admirals ordered their ships to close within 100 yards, so their cannons would have a better chance of penetrating the oak hulls of the Spanish ships.
This is the main gun deck. We're down here where the heavy cannon were carried, where the main fighting power of the ship would have been on board the English fleet. For the Spanish, it was slightly different. The guns down here would have been fired just the once, and then they'd close in and get on with the infantry fighting. So for the English, this is the center of the fighting ship. For the Spanish, it's an optional extra.
In the next 8 hours, the English gunners would inflict over 1,000 fatalities and 800 injuries on the Spanish, without the loss of a single ship.
The English were able to get in among the larger Spanish ships, do a great deal of damage with their cannon, and then wheel away again before the galleons could get in place to fire back. So what we have is a kind of hit-and-run tactic, very, very effective indeed, and the Spaniards had no answer for it.
The type of cannon used by the English gunners against the Spanish Armada is being investigated by cannoneer Colin Harriott and historian Andrew Lambert.
This gun we've got here is a 50-pounder hoop and stave breech loading gun. What we're going to attempt today is we're going to fire at a plank wall representing the side of a light enemy vessel. And we're going to demonstrate what happens when a cannonball hits wooden planking.
One of the great horrors of battle at sea was the terrifying and deadly effect of flying splinters caused by this type of cannon.
And it's not just the cannonball that does the damage, but it is the splinters that are thrown off and flung in all directions, roaring about like spears or arrows, and those which did the killing.
While there are eyewitness accounts of fighting at sea, there's nothing like recreating it so that we can study it in a bit more detail. We can put some dummies in there and see what the effect is when the shot comes through.
Fire in the gun! Firing, give him fire!
The accuracy and power are incredible. Enormous shock waves shake the camera as the cannonball flies toward the target at 1,000 feet per second. It rips through the wooden wall with ease, sending the deadly splinters everywhere.
Straight through the wood.
We've got a result there. We've got splinters in the dummies, got a round shot through the middle of that middle dummy. Target destroyed, 1 round.
The mathematical formula for the energy of a projectile tells us the 50-pound cannonball generated over 1 million joules of energy as it smashed into the wall, the equivalent of being hit by 550 M4 machine gun bullets at once.
And as a consequence of that high energy, the fragmentation effect, multiple fragments hit the torso of these casualties, is significant. There's been multiple trauma to these casualties, and as I said, you can see that some of them have actually been decapitated, and that's exactly what would happen.
By combining the power of heavy artillery with the agility of a fast, maneuverable vessel, the English invented a whole new way of fighting at sea.
No longer would it be soldiers on board ships crashing into each other and fighting like they were on land. Now they'd be specialists. Naval ratings, seamen gunners, experienced mariners commanding ships.
The English fleet had decisively defeated a major invasion attempt by the world superpower of the 16th century.
With the English Navy blocking the channel here, the Spanish Armada has no choice but to sail all the way around the coast of Britain and Ireland to head back home. As the Armada rounds the tip of Scotland and finds themselves in the unfamiliar waters of the North Atlantic, they're hit by Atlantic storms and the Gulf Stream and driven onto the rocky coast of Ireland.
After victory in the Channel, the English Navy was set to conquer the oceans of the world. Based on her maritime supremacy, England created over the next 300 years an empire that ruled over 1/4 of the world's population. Ancient discoveries has revealed the technologies behind the legendary fleets and heroic endeavors that have defined entire nations and shaped the world we live in today. From conquering the depths of the oceans to defending the freedom of the seas, ancient man pushed the technological boundaries to the limits in the mega battle for the ocean.